How important are positive friendships and healthful family relationships? You may be stunned to learn that without them, your physical, mental, and spiritual health may suffer. And I'll tell you why on today's episode of Ask Dr. Walt.
Today, our health includes our mind, our body, and our spirit. Separating medical facts from fiction is the key that leads to wise decisions about our health and well-being. Unpacking the latest research is vital. Doing what works helps us live our best lives today. How can we live longer? How can we live healthier? Let's ask Dr. Walt on Liftable TV.
Hi everyone, I'm family physician Dr. Walt Larimore, and I'm absolutely delighted that you're taking the time today to join me in my home office as we continue our discussion about some of the essentials of becoming healthy. We've begun reviewing my top 10 recommendations for you to consider on a path to becoming healthier physically, emotionally, mentally, relationally, and spiritually. Now, in previous episodes, we've already covered the essentials of true health, self-care, reducing sadness, that's stress, anxiety, and depression, and forgiveness. Now, today we'll cover part one of the essential of good relationships, or how and why to avoid loneliness like the plague. In our next episode, we'll cover part two. And in future shows, we'll cover the essentials of spiritual well-being, a positive self-image, discovering your destiny, personal responsibility and empowerment, and finally, teamwork in healthcare. You're not going to want to miss any of these. Well, at the end of today's program, I'll tell you how you can email me your questions for any of these future topics. But to discuss the topic of the health dangers of loneliness, let's take some of the questions from our viewers. I want to thank Derek and Jordan and Kylie on the production team for organizing these questions for you. So let's start with a question from Sam in Des Moines, Iowa. Sam writes, "Is loneliness really that big a deal? Why devote a program to it? Color me curious." Well, in the U.S., Sam, loneliness is a very common problem. A 2020 study from Cigna Insurance found that more than 60% of Americans report feeling lonely, left out, and lacking companionship. A UCLA study reported loneliness is reaching epidemic levels. My close friend, Joe Battaglia, has penned a wonderful book. It's titled Unfriended. And in the book, Joe writes, "We are created to have community. Smartphones, laptops cannot meet our needs for love, acceptance, touch, and connection." Nighttime radio host Delilah writes a chapter in Joe's book saying, "It seems that we're more connected, yet lonelier and more isolated than ever before." So Sam, to your question, why is this a big deal? It's because researchers are increasingly discovering that loneliness is a common source of distress, suffering, and impaired quality of life. Loneliness is strongly linked to adverse mental health issues like anxiety and depression. In fact, one researcher has written, "Loneliness is breaking our hearts, but as a culture, we rarely talk about it." Another physician, after studying loneliness, concluded, and I quote, "Simply stated, we are wired for relationships. We need one another and function healthier in relationships." In fact, relationships in general really impact mental and physical health. More and more research suggests that the kinds of bonds that you have with people, how close you are, how connected you feel to others, all have significant impact on your overall well-being. I want to give you an example. I want to tell you a story that occurred not long after I began private practice in a small town in the Great Smoky Mountains of Western North Carolina. I served there as a family physician and the county coroner. And one evening, a sheriff's deputy called. "Doc," he said, "we got a home death we need you to come see." The deputy met me at the door. "Doc," he said, "sure looks natural. Old Lady Smith's been up here all alone for years, never left the house, never had any visitors, never went to the doctor." He followed me into the house saying, "She had a friend who brought her food and supplies, and she found her here this evening and called us." And there she was, porcelain-like skin, white and smooth, surprisingly few wrinkles for someone born 52 years earlier. I suspected she saw very little sunlight in her days. There was no sign of foul play, but all outward signs was that she had died quietly and peacefully. As I examined her, I went through the myriad of possible causes of death. Only an autopsy would tell for sure, but as I was thinking about this, the deputy lobbed a theory I hadn't considered. "I tell you what she done died of, Doc," he began slowly. He was almost thoughtful as he said, "This here woman died of loneliness." He stood there looking down at the body, rubbing his chin whiskers. "You can put whatever you want on that death certificate," he said. "But I tell you what, son, she done died of loneliness. I see it all the time." He turned and walked out. Now, the autopsy results arrived at my office the next week. The conclusion? There was no obvious cause of death. But now, more than 35 years later, I think the deputy may have been right. She likely died of the plague of loneliness. Well, for our next question, Susan writes from Knoxville, Tennessee, and asks, "I can understand how loneliness could affect someone's emotional or spiritual health, but can it really affect our physical health?" Well, studies in recent years have documented the dramatic effects of loneliness on physical health. It turns out that loneliness, or what the researchers call social isolation, boosts inflammation levels. And this can lead to arthritis, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. In fact, it's been linked to a higher risk of coronary heart disease, heart attack, and stroke. It's even been shown to negatively influence our immune system and recovery from breast cancer. In fact, loneliness has the same effect as smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of negative health outcomes. In other words, loneliness not only hurts us emotionally and spiritually, but it can kill us physically. One huge meta-analysis of 148 studies involving 300,000 people reported that the major cause of premature death is loneliness. The researchers reported, and I quote, "Participants with stronger social skills had a 50% increased likelihood of long-term survival." They added that having healthy relationships is comparable to, quote, "the effects of quitting smoking." In other words, loneliness as a risk factor for predicting poor health has been shown to exceed many other well-known risk factors for mortality, such as obesity and physical inactivity. For our next question, it comes from Don in Vine Grove, Kentucky. He asks, "Is loneliness a bigger health risk for men or women?" Well, Don, one study of almost 12,000 Japanese men looked at their social support, which the researchers defined as, quote, "the maintenance of social networks and family and community ties." The group with the lowest social support, those that were the most lonely, had a 3 to 5-fold increase in heart disease. And the researchers concluded that social networks and close family ties help protect against disease and premature death in men. But Don, it's not just men. Researchers in Sweden have shown that women who have low levels of social support have more severe disease in their coronary arteries and an increased rate of premature death compared with those who are less lonely. Our next question comes from Abby in Orlando. She writes, "Dr. Walt, I've heard loneliness is more dangerous as we grow older. Is this true?" Well, Abby, experts have discovered that those who are isolated and lonely have dramatic declines in mental and physical health as they age compared to those with healthy relationships. And a Dutch study examined more than 2,000 older men and women and reported that those who reported loneliness had a 64% increase in the risk of developing dementia. In addition, people also experience an increase in loneliness when they retire from work. And that's why I always tell my patients, be sure you're retiring to something and that you have friends outside of your place of employment. Next question is from Peter in Chicago. He writes, "Besides just being around other people, isn't being loved by other people even more important?" Wow, you guys are asking some great questions. It's absolutely true, Peter, that love, social support, intimacy, security, safety, satisfaction, connectedness, and community, These all have been studied and provide a common theme in the medical literature and the social science literature. When a person feels loved and nurtured and appreciated, when we're valued, cared for, and supported, we're much more likely to be happier and healthier. But the opposite is also true. Negative emotions, like loneliness, have an important role to play in a happy, healthful life. They're big flashing signs that something needs to change and fast. In fact, I like saying that loneliness is proof that your divinely designed need for relationship and connection is intact. Our next question, this comes from Marilee in Kansas City. And she asks, in an earlier program, you said lifestyle decisions were even more important than our genetics. Is the same true for relationships with others? Well, Marilee, thanks for watching and pointing out that connection. It's another great question. In fact, many social science researchers are now saying, and listen to this, the most powerful across-the-board factor in predicting premature death and disease is lack of social support. And scientists have looked at a variety of relationship measures, such as a sense of being accepted, a sense of being loved by others, a sense that the support or help of others is available. And almost all of these studies conclude that social support affects health positively. People who believe that no one cares for them, who don't feel close to anyone, who don't feel that they have anyone with whom they can confide, or feel that they have no one who can help them out of a bind. These folks are 3 to 5 times as likely to experience premature death or disease. It's a big deal. Our next question comes from Diana, in Virginia Beach, Virginia. She writes, as a family physician, it seems to me that my lonely patients are more likely to engage in unhealthy lifestyles. Do you find that to be true? Does that explain their lack of health? Diana, thanks for watching the show, especially as a fellow family physician, and I think your observation is valid. Another reason that loneliness kills is that lonely people are more likely to practice unhealthy habits, such as like abusing tobacco, abusing alcohol, eating too much food, abusing drugs. In addition, lonely people are more likely to experience poor mental health from anger, anxiety, depression, high-stress jobs, low economic status, and lack of social support. And all of these mental and physical issues can go hand in hand with loneliness. But they account for only a portion of the risk of loneliness. In other words, when the researchers control for unhealthy lifestyles or emotional health, loneliness is still by itself a major risk factor for poor mental health, poor physical health, and an increased risk of premature death. Nevertheless, there's now no doubt that when these risk factors come together in one person, their effects, they compound, they explode to dangerous levels in one's health. Diane, thanks for the question. The next one comes from Kim in Sparta, Tennessee. She writes, I'm concerned about a friend who I think is desperately lonely, but she just fills her life with activities and commitments in social media rather than true friends. Is she actually harming her health? Well, Kim, I bet we all have friends, maybe even family members like this, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. Happy and healthful living requires positive social relationships in family and in community. And the same is simply not true about activity alone. Human beings truly live only insofar as we're related to others with whom we share life and love, with whom we together serve God, family, and our community. And Kim, it sounds to me like you sense your friend is lonely, even when she's surrounded by people. And I bet in her heart of hearts, she actually knows this. Let me share a quote from contemporary American researcher George Barna. He writes this, overall, the research paints a portrait of a nation whose adults keep themselves occupied so they do not have to face significant shortcomings. Many people admit to lacking relational connections and meaning in life. These two factors are critical to gaining joy and fulfillment in life. George Barna also writes this: the common solution is to keep busy and to stimulate ourselves with a variety of new experiences. That way, we're not so likely to feel the pain of those fundamental holes in our life. People have discovered that if they fill the gaps with commitments and excitement, then they're less prone to feel the emptiness of loneliness and aimlessness. Of course, that just prolongs the inner despair that eventually cannot be suppressed any longer. My sense is this: that being with all kinds of people in superficial ways all day long can actually be toxic. And what's the antidote to this poison? It's concentrating on spending time, quality time, with one or two close friends. And Kim, the good news is that your friend can reduce her loneliness by developing and enriching friendships. And this may improve her overall health. And Kim, it sounds like you are the genuine friend that she needs. Well, I only have time for one more question. So this one comes from Jack in Springfield, Illinois. And he writes this: Dr. Walt, I'm a loner, and if I were to be honest, I am lonely. What do you recommend? I'm uncomfortable being in large groups or around a bunch of people. Jack, your question is the perfect one to end with. I like this quote from Mother Teresa. She said, "Loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible poverty." I want to emphasize that to avoid the plague of loneliness, you don't need a large group of friends. Even one or two close friends with whom you share interests and affection can do the trick. Intentionally involve yourself in a variety of positive and healthy social relationships with people you like and admire, and who are willing and able to care for you and about you. I think it's why the Bible teaches in Hebrews 10:25, let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another. You know, Jesus set an example for us by making time for his friends. He had his 3 best friends. He had 12 very good friends and about 70 strong acquaintances. I like what Dr. J. Nix Pitts points out. The smaller the number, the greater the intimacy. Buddies can bless you, but best friends shape you. You give time to your friends, but they give you life, an invaluable return on investment. The wisest man who ever lived, King Solomon, wrote in Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. So I want to end today's program with my prescription for you. One of the first things I prescribe for folks who suffer from loneliness is that they become active in volunteer work. I always keep a list of volunteer and mission opportunities my patients can choose from. And I insist that they commit to this activity. And almost invariably, when they fill this prescription, when they begin to give of themselves and they begin friendships with others, the change in their countenance and their overall health is dramatic. Showing kindness with others, to others, is an antidote to the poison of loneliness. Well, our time's up for today. To continue your journey to becoming a highly healthy person, next time I'll have part 2 of avoiding loneliness like the plague, the essential of relationships. I want to help you and those you love avoid loneliness like the life-threatening plague it is. And by the way, I go into far more detail and tips about avoiding loneliness and building positive relationships in 2 of my best-selling books. The first is Fit Over 50, Make Simple Choices for a Healthier, Happier You. And by the way, if you're 20 or 30 or 40, all the tips in this book are going to apply to you too. And then the second book is 10 Essentials of Happy, Healthy People, Becoming and Staying Highly Healthy. And you can find these and many of my other books at drwalt.com. Just click on the tab that says Books. Finally, I'd love to hear from you. What questions do you have about the association of your spiritual health to your physical health? That's going to be our next topic. How does spiritual health impact physical, emotional, mental, and relational health? Just email them right here to me at drwalt@liftable.tv. and also any other general health questions that you might have. We'll combine those for future programs. That's Dr. Walt at liftable.tv. So until our next visit, dear friends, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. I'm Dr. Walt Larimore, and I look forward to seeing you for our next visit on Ask Dr. Walt.